The morning sky above Denver shimmered in soft gold, the kind that promised an easy flight. The terminal buzzed with the usual rhythm of travel-rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and the muted hum of coffee machines. Flight 237 to San Francisco was boarding, and among the crew walking down the jet bridge was a woman named Evelyn Ross, senior flight attendant for 14 years. Her steps were steady, but her eyes were sharper than most. Every corner of the aircraft told her something: the flicker of a cabin light, the faint vibration under the floor panels, the uneven tone of the auxiliary power unit. She'd always noticed things others didn't. And that morning, something was wrong. As she began her pre-flight checks, the cabin looked perfectly normal. Leather seats gleaming under warm lights, passengers trickling in with smiles and earbuds, the faint scent of jet fuel mixing with coffee. But Evelyn couldn't shake a subtle tension in the air. It wasn't something she could name, just a gut feeling pressing at the edges of her calm. Near row 22, a man struggled to fit his bag in the overhead bin. She helped him, smiling the way she always did, composed, reassuring, invisible. Her job was to make everyone feel safe, even when she didn't. At the back galley, she glanced at the emergency panel. One light blinked twice before going still. A flicker, barely noticeable. But Evelyn noticed. Outside, the engines hummed to life, blades slicing the air with precision. She looked through the small porthole of the rear door. The tarmac glowed under morning light, ground crew moving efficiently like clockwork. Yet something caught her attention, a faint trail of vapor rising from under the left wing. Just for a second it shimmered, then disappeared. She frowned, pressing her hand gently against the door frame, feeling the vibration of the fuselage. It wasn't unusual, but it wasn't familiar either. The captain's voice came over the intercom, routine and calm, announcing their flight time, cruising altitude, and clear weather ahead. Evelyn listened, but her eyes stayed on the window. Passengers settled in. A child near the window drew on the glass with her finger, writing invisible letters. A young couple laughed softly, their hands intertwined. A business traveler typed furiously on his laptop, oblivious to the world outside. Everything looked ordinary, perfectly ordinary, but Evelyn's instincts whispered otherwise. She moved down the aisle again, her gaze scanning the cabin with quiet precision. The emergency exits clear, the floor lights functional, the oxygen masks armed. Everything was as it should be. Still, something didn't fit. At the rear jump seat, she checked the interphone, listening to the faint static from the cockpit. A few words she couldn't make out. Then silence. She adjusted the volume. Nothing. Then a sound. Dull, metallic, faint, like a soft clang from beneath the cabin floor. Her pulse tightened. She leaned slightly, pretending to check the lavatory door while focusing her hearing. Another clang. Then nothing. The engines roared higher. They were ready for pushback. Evelyn walked to the forward galley, her heels clicking lightly on the cabin floor. She greeted passengers, checked seatbelts, smiled when needed. But her mind was elsewhere, tracing every possible explanation. A loose panel? Cargo shift? Mechanical resonance? None fit. Not with the smell she now noticed, faint but sharp, like overheated insulation or hydraulic fluid. Her heart beat slower, a strange calm, born of experience. The gate agent signaled the final door close. Evelyn stood by, one hand resting on the lever. She looked down the aisle one last time, faces calm, screens glowing, lives unaware of the ticking beneath their feet. She closed the door. The seal locked with a hiss. The aircraft began to push back, slowly turning toward the runway. Evelyn strapped into her seat. But her mind replayed the clues. The vapor trail, the flicker, the sound, the smell. 4 small details, nothing on their own, but together. She stared out at the wing again. The sunlight bounced off its metallic curve, dazzling bright. For a second, she thought she saw a shimmer, a distortion in the reflection, like heat, but it was gone. As they taxied, the hum beneath the cabin deepened. Rhythmic, mechanical, precise, except now, between the intervals, a faint, irregular vibration pulsed. Subtle, but there. Evelyn's jaw clenched. She had felt this once before, years ago on a flight that had to turn back after a fuel line leak. Her instincts whispered, "Check again." She unbuckled quietly, pretending to organize supplies in the galley as the aircraft paused before the runway. Through the tiny window, she saw the wing again, and this time, she was certain. A small shimmer of liquid glistened where there shouldn't have been any. Her breath caught. The engine spooled louder, preparing for takeoff. Evelyn's eyes darted to the cockpit door. She couldn't just walk in, and not without cause. But she could act differently. Her decision formed fast, instinct overtaking reason. She reached for the interphone, her voice steady but urgent as she spoke into it. 9 minutes from now, that call would save 148 lives. But in that moment, no one knew. Not the pilots, not the passengers, not even Evelyn, how close they were to disaster. Only that something in her gut refused to be ignored. And sometimes instinct is the only warning the sky gives. The engines roared with controlled fury as Flight 237 rolled onto the runway. The morning sunlight turned the tarmac into a silver ribbon beneath the plane's nose. Passengers leaned back in their seats, some closing their eyes, others gripping armrests as the aircraft began to accelerate. To them, it was just another flight. To Evelyn Ross, every vibration mattered. As the plane surged forward, her hand rested on the jump seat handle, fingers tightening with each increasing tremor. The subtle pulse she'd felt earlier, that irregular vibration, had not gone away. If anything, it had deepened. A faint rhythmic shudder that didn't belong to the sound of engines. The aircraft lifted, nose rising against the morning sky. Denver fell away below, shrinking into a patchwork of gold and gray. Clouds drifted ahead, soft and harmless. But Evelyn's eyes didn't leave the wing. It shimmered again. A silver flicker, quick, unnatural, as though sunlight had caught something wet. At 35 seconds into the climb, a faint haze trailed behind the left engine. Not smoke, not vapor, and something finer, almost invisible. Her instincts snapped awake like a wire pulled tight. She turned in her seat slightly. Her gaze flicking across the passengers, unaware, relaxed, some already scrolling through their phones, others peering out at the clouds. A world suspended in calm seconds before chaos. The captain's voice broke over the intercom, routine and steady. Evelyn listened, but she already knew. Something was happening beneath them. She looked toward the rear galley. A smell was forming. Faint, chemical, sharp. It crawled through the air like an invisible whisper. She knew that scent too well. It wasn't food or cleaning fluid or burnt plastic. It was hydraulic oil, the kind that belonged deep inside the control systems. Not in the passenger cabin. Her pulse quickened, but her expression didn't change. Calm was her armor. At T-minus 9 minutes, she quietly unbuckled from her jump seat. Passengers barely noticed her movement. She walked the aisle, scanning each row with practiced grace. Her steps looked casual, a flight attendant checking on comfort. But her eyes darted to every vent, every panel, every tiny inconsistency in the aircraft's rhythm. At row 17, she paused. A faint sound echoed below, a low, irregular hum followed by a click. It felt wrong. She glanced at the floor. Directly above a compartment that held hydraulic and electrical lines, she had seen a maintenance notice weeks ago about a similar aircraft with fluid seepage in that area. The report had said it was minor, but in aviation, minor could turn deadly in seconds. She needed proof. Back in the galley, she crouched near the paneling and pressed her palm against the thin floor. The vibration was warm, too warm. She rose quickly, grabbed a flashlight, and discreetly inspected the seams near the lavatory wall. A faint shimmer of moisture glistened between two metal joints. Barely visible, but it was there. A leak. She exhaled slowly. Her mind began to run through possibilities. If the hydraulic system was leaking, the flaps or rudder controls could fail. If the fluid hit hot components, it could ignite. And if it spread near the rear electrical systems? She didn't finish the thought. She turned her gaze toward the cockpit door. The captain needed to know, but procedure demanded evidence, not instinct. And she couldn't panic the passengers. Not yet. The aircraft leveled off at 22,000 feet. The fastened seatbelt light flicked off. The cabin relaxed again. Laughter, music, the faint pop of soda cans. Normalcy returned. But the smell grew stronger. Evelyn's heart thudded once hard. She moved toward the forward galley, opened the small maintenance compartment near the service cart. A whisper of smoke curled out, thin, almost invisible. Her flashlight beam cut through it, white-gray, faintly blue at the edges. That was enough. Her decision was instant. Her duty wasn't to explain, it was to protect. And she knew what needed to happen. She reached for the interphone again, her hand steady, eyes calm. In the cockpit, the crew would hear her voice and know what it meant: immediate inspection. But even as she spoke, she looked down the aisle and saw what they couldn't yet: a thin thread of smoke weaving up from the base of the floor panels near seat 24C. The leak had reached heat. Her instinct screamed now, not in panic, but precision. She turned to the nearest flight attendant, signaling subtly. Procedures activated silently, codes exchanged through gestures, movements rehearsed but rarely used. She moved quickly, her eyes sharp. Row 24. A man's carry-on bag sat under the seat, right where the smoke trailed from beneath. She crouched, pulled it away, revealing the faintest orange glow flickering under the panel edge. Fire. It wasn't large, yet, but fires at altitude didn't need time to grow. Her hands moved automatically. She reached for the halon extinguisher, pulled the safety pin and aimed at the seam, short bursts in tight intervals. The gas hissed, the glow faded, but smoke continued. The passengers stirred now, confusion spreading like static. Evelyn's calm movements were their only anchor. Deliberate, confident, unafraid. At T-2 minutes, she secured the cabin, checked the exits, and locked eyes with her crew, silent understanding. Then the vibration eased. The engines throttled back. Through the small window, the ground appeared again. Denver, waiting. At T-0, the aircraft touched down harder than usual. Tires screeching, reverse thrust roaring. Evelyn braced, her hands gripping the seatbelt straps. The plane slowed, veering slightly to the left. She knew why: hydraulic asymmetry. But they were on the ground, and alive. When the captain ordered an immediate evacuation, Evelyn didn't hesitate. She turned, scanning faces one last time, then shouted two words that would echo in everyone's memory later. Leave immediately. 9 minutes. From instinct to impact. That's all it took for one woman's gut feeling to save 148 lives. The wheels hit the runway harder than anyone expected. A jolt rippled through the cabin. Drinks spilled. Bags shifted and gasps filled the air. The engines roared in reverse thrust, screaming against the tarmac. The sound was raw, violent, alive. The aircraft shuddered as if every bolt and rivet remembered how close they had come to failure. Smoke trailed faintly behind as it slowed, tires screeching under pressure. Then, silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The passengers sat frozen, still gripping their seats, waiting for something to go wrong. Then, through the haze of disbelief, the sound of calm professionalism cut through the cabin. The clear, commanding gestures of a woman who refused to lose control. Evelyn Ross was already on her feet. The crew knew what to do. The code was clear: evacuate immediately. She pulled the lever, the front doors hissed open, slides deploying with violent bursts of compressed air. The smell of rubber and chemical foam filled the cabin. Passengers stumbled toward the exits, guided by Evelyn's steady hands. Her voice carried no fear, only control. Children were lifted, elders supported, chaos shaped into motion. She moved from aisle to aisle, scanning for movement, counting heads, her instincts running faster than her thoughts. Behind her, a faint glow flickered again under the floor panels. The halon had contained it, but not killed it. The heat was returning. Without hesitation, she grabbed another extinguisher, spraying short, precise bursts. The gas hissed white, swallowing the smoke. Her arm trembled, but her focus stayed perfect. As the last passengers disappeared down the slide, Evelyn turned once more, a single sweep of her gaze across the cabin. Every seat, every corner empty. Then she left. The air outside was cool, biting with jet fuel and morning wind. Sirens screamed across the runway as fire trucks rushed in. The crew guided passengers across the tarmac, wrapping them in blankets, helping them sit. Some cried. Some stared blankly at the aircraft, their rescuer and near destroyer. From a distance, Evelyn stood still, her uniform streaked with gray, hair disheveled but posture unbroken. The left engine still smoked faintly, glimmers of heat fading into daylight. She didn't move until she saw every passenger accounted for. Only then did her breath catch, not from exhaustion, from realization. It was over. But she knew something deeper. It hadn't been an accident. Not entirely. Hours later, inside a sterile airport operations room, investigators gathered around a table. The remains of the hydraulic line from under the cabin had been removed. It showed clear burn marks and a rupture point near a faulty joint. They traced the issue back to a pressure imbalance in the left system, an issue that had been flagged in an inspection months earlier, dismissed as non-critical. One of the officials stared at the report in silence before glancing up. Evelyn sat opposite them, hands folded, face expressionless. Her uniform had been replaced with a gray blanket. Her hair still smelled faintly of smoke. The lead investigator studied her file. "You acted before the cockpit even declared an emergency," he said, though his words were more disbelief than accusation. Evelyn simply nodded. They reviewed the black box recordings. 9 minutes before landing, her voice had come through the interphone, calm, clear, specific. It had triggered an immediate checklist in the cockpit, and that sequence of actions had saved the aircraft from losing total control of its hydraulics. She hadn't guessed. She had known exactly what to do. One of the younger investigators looked confused. How could she know that from the cabin? He whispered. The older man leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Because she's done it before." That night, as the airport quieted, Evelyn walked through the dim terminal alone. Rain tapped against the glass, reflecting streaks of red and white from the emergency trucks still parked near the runway. Her reflection stared back at her, older now, weary but unshaken. On her wrist, faint under the sleeve of her uniform, a small scar glimmered under the light, the kind left by a pressure suit buckle, not something a commercial flight attendant usually wore. Years ago, long before she joined civilian aviation, Evelyn had flown in a different sky, a different kind of aircraft, one where instincts weren't optional. They were survival. Her record in the Air Force had been clean. Too clean, some said. She'd left after a classified training mission went wrong. Details buried. Reports sealed. No one at the airline knew that. She'd once been part of a rapid response unit trained for mid-air emergencies and combat rescue. No one knew she'd lost a co-pilot in a hydraulic failure. The same kind of leak that had just tried to kill her again. And that's why she recognized it instantly. It wasn't intuition. It was memory. The news broke by evening. Local networks showed footage of passengers wrapped in silver blankets, crying, thanking the brave flight attendant who told us to leave immediately. But Evelyn didn't watch. She sat in a small office overlooking the runway, eyes fixed on the grounded aircraft now surrounded by flashing lights. She knew what the reports would say. Technical malfunction. Crew acted professionally. No injuries reported. But she also knew what wouldn't make the news. How close the line between calm and chaos truly was. 9 minutes. That was all she had. 9 minutes between suspicion and survival. The airline director entered quietly, handing her a cup of coffee. He said something meant to comfort her. Words about heroism, about luck. She smiled faintly, nodded, and thanked him. But she didn't believe in luck. Not anymore. Outside, the rain turned to mist. The runway lights glowed soft against the fog, stretching endlessly into the dark horizon. Evelyn stood, adjusting her jacket. She walked slowly toward the window, watching the silhouettes of planes taxiing under the floodlights. Each one carried faces who trusted the sky, faces who would never know how fragile that trust really was. She raised her hand slightly, resting her fingers against the cold glass and as if saying goodbye to something invisible. Then she turned and walked away. In the next hangar over, investigators were still piecing together data. One of them found something unusual. A small handwritten note taped near the maintenance log of flight 237. It wasn't official, just initials and a date. But beneath it, one line was scrawled in faint pencil. "If it leaks again, trust the signs." The investigator frowned. The handwriting didn't match any of the engineers. He looked out the window, just in time to see Evelyn Ross disappear into the night, her reflection swallowed by the glow of the runway lights. The morning after the incident, the world had already begun to move on. News reports ran loops of the emergency landing, flashes of red lights, trembling passengers descending the inflatable slides, and the calm figure of the flight attendant guiding them through the chaos. Her name was mentioned briefly in passing, but beyond that, she remained just another uniform in the sea of aviation heroes. Evelyn sat in a quiet hospital room, the sunlight diffused through half-drawn blinds. Her wrist was bandaged from a minor burn, a faint reminder of the moment. She pulled the smoke detector, free, and crawled through the aisle to extinguish the fire. Outside her window, the hum of distant jets whispered the familiar song of the skies. The world saw luck, but Evelyn knew it wasn't luck. It was instinct. An instinct forged not from routine safety briefings, but from something far older, something buried deep in her past. As the official report was prepared, investigators pieced together what had happened. A loose wire in the galley's power unit, a malfunction that could have ignited a full cabin fire within minutes. The smoke had begun to circulate beneath the floor panels, invisible at first, deadly within seconds. Evelyn's order to leave immediately wasn't random panic. It was the only command that saved them all. But there was something else, a detail that puzzled the chief investigator. The cockpit voice recorder captured a calm tone in the cabin transmission. Not fear, not confusion, command. It sounded like someone trained for crisis, a voice steady enough to control the entire aircraft. They didn't know that before she ever wore the blue uniform of a commercial airline. Evelyn Lang had once worn another, olive green, with wings stitched above her heart. Years ago, she had served in the Air Force, a pilot, a leader. But a mechanical failure during a rescue operation had cost her not only her co-pilot, but her own wings. Grounded permanently, she vanished quietly from the sky she loved. The military file was sealed. She never spoke of it again. Yet the instinct never left her. When the smoke filled the cabin that day, her mind hadn't thought like a flight attendant. It had thought like a pilot. Calculating oxygen flow, cabin pressure, passenger reaction. Every second a decision. Every decision a life. That's why she noticed the flicker of the indicator light before anyone else. That's why she knew the timing. That's why she told them to leave. Not later, not soon, but now. And 9 minutes later, her instinct proved right. Weeks passed. The airline offered her an award, but she declined. She didn't want cameras or interviews. Instead, she returned to work quietly, serving coffee and calming nervous passengers like always. Yet there was a subtle change in her presence, an invisible gravity. People who met her on board often said she had a strange calmness, as if turbulence itself respected her. One afternoon, while preparing for takeoff on another flight, Evelyn looked out the small circular window beside her jump seat. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden streak across the clouds. For a moment, her reflection appeared in the glass. The same calm eyes that once stared down a cockpit emergency, now softened by peace. In that reflection, she saw the two worlds she had lived, the pilot who once fell from the sky, and the woman who found her wings again through courage, not flight. Outside, the runway lights blinked one after another like beating hearts, guiding the plane forward. As the engines roared and the aircraft lifted from the ground, she closed her eyes and smiled faintly. Somewhere high above the clouds, the memory of that night still lived. The flicker of smoke, the 9 minutes of chaos, and the choice that saved hundreds of lives. But Evelyn didn't carry it as a burden anymore. She carried it as proof. Proof that sometimes the greatest pilots aren't in the cockpit. They're the ones who never stop watching, never stop listening, and never stop caring enough to act when the sky turns against them. And as Flight 417 pierced through the clouds into the rising light, Evelyn Lang, the quiet hero in the blue uniform, finally felt weightless again.